I stood in the doorway, my calloused hands hidden behind my back, watching the florists make final adjustments to the centerpieces I couldn't afford but had charged to my already maxed out credit card anyway. Mom, what are you wearing? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The voice cut through my moment of quiet pride like glass. I turned to see my daughter Sophia standing in the hallway, resplendent in her $8,000 wedding dress, the one I'd taken a second mortgage on our house to pay for. Her perfectly contoured face was twisted in an expression I'd seen too many times lately, barely concealed horror. It's my blue dress, sweetheart. The one from JCPenney. I know. She said the store name like it was a curse word. Mom, this is my wedding day. There are going to be photographers everywhere. Marcus's family is here. Important people. I looked down at the navy blue dress I'd bought on clearance 2 years ago. It was clean, pressed, and the most formal thing I owned. The small pearl brooch at the collar had been my mother's, the only piece of jewelry I had left after selling everything else to fund this fairy tale wedding. I thought you liked this dress, I said softly, remembering the day I'd worn it to her college graduation. She'd hugged me then, told me I looked pretty. That was different. Sophia's voice carried the sharp edge of panic. This is my wedding. Marcus's father owns 3 restaurants. His mother is on the hospital board. They're going to think. She trailed off, but I could fill in the blanks. They were going to think. She came from nothing. Which, of course, she did. My daughter's fiancé appeared beside her, adjusting his pristine white bow tie. Marcus Whitmore III, even his name sounded expensive. 26 years old, fresh out of law school, destined for his father's firm and a life of country club memberships and winter homes. Everything I'd dreamed my daughter might have someday. Is there a problem, darling? He asked, his voice carrying that particular blend of privilege and mild annoyance I'd grown accustomed to over the past year. Just discussing the final details, I said quickly, forcing a smile. I'd learned to make myself small around Marcus, to speak softly and take up as little space as possible. He tolerated me because he loved Sophia, but I could see the questions in his eyes whenever he looked at our modest house or my second-hand car. Mom was just going to change into something more appropriate, Sophia said, her eyes pleading with me to understand. The word hit me like a physical blow. Inappropriate. That's what I was. After working 60-hour weeks at the diner for the past 5 years, saving every penny I could scrape together. After selling my grandmother's antique jewelry collection to pay for the down payment on this venue. After lying awake nights calculating and recalculating how I could make the numbers work, how I could give my only child the wedding of her dreams. Of course, I heard myself saying, I'll just run home and grab something else. But we both knew I didn't have anything else. The blue dress was it. My one formal option from a wardrobe that consisted mainly of diner uniforms and thrift store finds. Actually, Mom, Sophia exchanged a look with Marcus. We were thinking maybe you could skip the ceremony. Just come for the reception? That way you'd have time to find something to wear, and you wouldn't have to worry about being in any of the formal photos. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, like this video, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The words hung in the air between us like smoke from a fire. Skip the ceremony. Miss walking my daughter down the aisle because her father had disappeared when she was 3, leaving me to raise her alone. Miss seeing her say her vows, kiss her new husband, begin the life I'd sacrificed everything to make possible. You want me to miss your wedding ceremony? The question came out as a whisper. Not miss it, Marcus interjected smoothly. Just give you time to prepare properly for the reception. The ceremony is really just for immediate family anyway. Immediate family. I'd been many things in my 43 years, single mother, waitress, part-time bookkeeper, full-time worrier, but I'd never questioned whether I was immediate family to my own daughter. Mom, you understand, right? Sophia's voice was softer now, almost pleading. This is important to me. To us. Marcus's family has certain expectations, and I just want everything to be perfect. I stared at my daughter, my brilliant, beautiful daughter who'd gotten a full scholarship to Northwestern, who'd graduated summa cum laude, who'd landed a job at a prestigious marketing firm. The daughter I'd raised on store-brand cereal and generic mac and cheese, who'd worn hand-me-down clothes until she was old enough to be embarrassed by them, who'd shared my bed until she was 7 because we couldn't afford a 2-bedroom apartment, the daughter who was now asking me to hide in shame on her wedding day. I understand, I said finally, my voice steady despite the earthquake happening in my chest. You want everything to be perfect. Relief flooded Sophia's face. I knew you'd understand. You've always been so good about these things. So, flexible. Flexible. Another word that landed like a punch. I'd been flexible when she wanted to go to private school and I worked double shifts to pay the tuition. Flexible when she needed a car for college and I walked to work for 6 months to save for the down payment. Flexible when she moved in with Marcus and stopped calling me every night like she had since she was a teenager. I should go then, I said, backing toward the door. Let you finish getting ready. Mom, wait. Sophia caught my arm, and for a moment, I thought she'd changed her mind. The caterer needs the final payment. Did you bring the check? Of course. The check. Another $3,000 I didn't have, borrowed against a credit card that was already screaming. I reached into my purse and pulled out the envelope, my name written in my own careful handwriting on the pay-to line. Here you go, sweetheart. She took it without looking at it, already turning back to Marcus. Great. The photographer wants to start the getting ready shots in 20 minutes. Mom, you remember what we talked about, right? About the reception? I remembered. Come fashionably late, after the formal photos. Sit at the table in the back with the vendor representatives and distant relatives. Keep a low profile. Don't mention working at the diner if anyone asks about my job, just say I'm between opportunities. I remember. Perfect. You're the best, Mom. I don't know what I'd do without you. The irony of the statement wasn't lost on me as I walked through the ballroom one last time, past the flowers I'd chosen, the linens I'd approved, the cake I'd designed with the baker. The wedding I'd planned, paid for, and was now being asked to hide from outside in the parking lot. I sat in my 15-year-old Honda Civic, the one with the dent in the passenger door and the air conditioning that only worked on odd-numbered days, and watched through the windows as my daughter's perfect day unfolded without me. The photographer was already arranging the bridesmaids for shots in the garden. Marcus's family had arrived in a cavalcade of luxury SUVs and sports cars, the women in designer suits that cost more than I made in 2 months, the men in custom tuxedos that fit like they were born wearing them. My phone buzzed with a text from my sister Linda. Can't wait to see photos. You must be so excited. I stared at the message, trying to figure out how to respond. How do you explain that you're not allowed at your own daughter's wedding ceremony? That you've been deemed inappropriate, an embarrassment, a threat to the perfect image your child is trying to project? Instead, I typed back, everything is beautiful. She looks perfect. It wasn't a lie. From where I sat, I could see Sophia through the bridal suite window, radiant in her wedding dress, surrounded by her bridesmaids in their coordinating blush pink gowns. She did look perfect. Happy, complete, and completely unaware that her mother was sitting in the parking lot, watching her wedding day like a stranger. The ceremony was set to begin in an hour. I had that long to decide whether I was going to drive home, change into my other dress, the black one I'd worn to my mother's funeral 5 years ago, and sneak into the back row of the reception like some kind of party crasher, or whether I was going to do something else entirely. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found the number I was looking for. Sarah Mitchell, my old high school friend who'd become a successful real estate agent in the city. She'd been after me for years to sell the house, said the property values in my neighborhood had skyrocketed, that I could make enough to buy something smaller and have money left over to finally take care of myself for once. It's probably worth twice what you paid for it, she'd told me just last month. Helen, you're sitting on a goldmine. You could sell tomorrow and be comfortable for the first time in your life. But I'd always said no. The house was Sophia's security, her inheritance, the only thing of value I had to leave her. Even though she'd never expressed any interest in it, even though she'd already made it clear she'd be living in Marcus's world from now on, I'd held on to it because it was hers. Mom, you embarrass us. The words echoed in my head as I sat in that parking lot, watching through the window as my daughter, the child I'd sacrificed everything for, prepared for the most important day of her life without me. I opened my banking app and looked at my accounts. Checking, $247.83. Savings, $891.22. Credit cards, maxed out. The house, nearly paid off, but with a fresh second mortgage that would take me 15 years to clear if I kept working at the diner. Until I was 60.15 more years of 60-hour weeks. 15 more years of sore feet and grease-stained uniforms and customers who called me "Hon" and left 20% tips on $8 meals. 15 more years of living paycheck to paycheck so I could maintain a house for a daughter who thought I was an embarrassment. My phone rang. Sophia's number. Mom? Where are you? The caterer is looking for you. Something about the final payment? I gave you the check, I said. I know, but they're saying there's an issue with the amount. Can you come back in? I closed my eyes, feeling the familiar weight of responsibility settle on my shoulders. The mother's burden, always fixing, always solving, always making it work no matter the cost to yourself. I'll be right there, I said, but as I hung up the phone and sat in the silence of my car, watching my daughter's perfect wedding unfold in a ballroom I couldn't afford, paid for with money I didn't have, for a daughter who didn't want me there, I realized something had shifted. For the first time in 23 years of motherhood, I found myself asking not, "How can I fix this?" but "Why should I?" The question hung in the air like a challenge, and as I stared at my reflection in the rearview mirror, at the tired eyes and work-worn hands and discount store dress of a woman who'd given everything and been told it wasn't good enough, I felt something I hadn't experienced in decades. I felt angry. I walked back into the ballroom with my shoulders squared, the anger still simmering in my chest like water just before it boils. The caterer, a thin woman named Patricia who'd been nothing but condescending during our planning meetings, was waiting by the kitchen entrance with her arms crossed and that particular expression of barely concealed irritation reserved for customers. She considered beneath her. "Mrs. Morrison, there seems to be a discrepancy with your payment. The check is for $3,000, but our final invoice shows $3,847. I stared at her, feeling that familiar knot of panic twist in my stomach. "That's not possible. We agreed on $3,000. I have the contract." "The contract was for the base package," Patricia said, producing a folder with theatrical precision. "But there were several add-ons requested by the bride. Premium linens, upgraded centerpieces, additional hors d'oeuvres, champagne for the bridal party's getting ready toast. Surely you remember approving these?" I didn't remember. But then again, I'd been working so many hours lately that most days blended together in a haze of exhaustion. Had Sophia mentioned upgrades? Had I nodded along without really listening? Too tired to process the financial implications. "I don't have another $847, I said quietly, aware that several of the wedding party were within earshot. Patricia's smile was razor sharp. "Then I'm afraid we have a problem. The additional items have already been prepared. The champagne has been opened. The premium linens are already on the tables." I pulled out my phone and opened my banking app again, as if the numbers might have magically changed in the past 10 minutes. They hadn't. I had $247 in checking, and even if I emptied my savings account, I'd still be short by more than $500. Could I put it on a credit card? I asked, knowing full well that all 3 of my cards were already at their limits. "We can certainly try," Patricia said, though her tone suggested she already knew what the outcome would be. The card reader beeped 3 times, 3 declined transactions that felt like slaps to the face. Patricia's expression shifted from condescending to openly hostile. "Mrs. Morrison, I'm going to need this resolved immediately, or I'm afraid we'll have to start removing the upgraded items from the reception." I could picture it, Patricia's staff stripping away the elegant centerpieces, replacing the crisp white linens with cheaper alternatives, removing the silver-plated serving dishes. All while the guests watched, while Marcus's family formed their opinions about the kind of people who couldn't even pay their bills properly. "Please," I whispered. "Give me just a few minutes to figure something out." I stepped away from Patricia and called my bank, knowing it was pointless but desperate enough to try anyway. The automated system confirmed what I already knew: no available credit, no overdraft protection remaining, no emergency funds to tap into. My phone buzzed with a text from my boss at the diner. "Helen, I know it's your daughter's wedding day, but Jenny called in sick and we're swamped. Any chance you could come in for a few hours tonight? Double time. Double time. $28 an hour instead of $14. If I worked a full 8-hour shift, that would be $224, still not enough to cover the shortage, but it would at least show Patricia I was trying, but it would mean leaving my daughter's wedding reception early, assuming I was even welcome there anymore. Another text, this one from Sophia, Mom, where are you? Photographer wants family photos in 5 minutes. Family photos. The irony was almost laughable. An hour ago, she'd asked me to skip the ceremony because I was an embarrassment. Now she needed me for the pictures that would hang on her walls for the rest of her life. I looked around the ballroom, at the wedding I'd mortgaged my future to create, and felt something crack inside my chest. Not break, not yet, but develop a hairline fracture that would spread if I wasn't careful. Mrs. Morrison? Patricia was back, her impatience now undisguised. I really do need an answer. I'll get you the money, I said, though I had no idea how. When? Before the reception starts. Patricia checked her watch. That's 2 hours. I'll hold you to that. I nodded and walked toward the bridal suite, my mind racing through impossible options. I could call Linda, but she was barely making ends meet herself after her divorce. I could try to get a payday loan, but those places weren't open on Saturdays. I could, Mom. Finally. Sophia appeared in the hallway, radiant and breathless. Come on, we need you for photos. She grabbed my hand and pulled me toward the garden where the photographer had set up an elaborate scene with white roses and trailing ivy. Marcus's family was already positioned, his parents looking like they'd stepped out of a country club magazine, his sister perfect in her role as matron of honor, his grandmother seated regally in an antique chair someone had dragged from inside. Mrs. Morrison, wonderful. The photographer, an energetic woman named Chloe, gestured for me to join the group. Let's get some family shots before we lose this beautiful light. I stood where she directed, between Sophia and Marcus's mother, and tried to smile as the camera clicked. But I could see myself in the preview on Chloe's camera back, tired, worn, utterly out of place among these polished people in their expensive clothes. Beautiful. Now let's do just the bride's side, Chloe said cheerfully, just the bride's side. That would be me. Standing alone next to my daughter while Marcus's large, prosperous family watched from the sidelines, the contrast was stark. Sophia had bloomed in the year since she'd started dating Marcus, transforming from my practical, down-to-earth daughter into someone who fit seamlessly into his world of charity galas and wine tastings and weekend trips to family vacation homes. I'd been proud of her adaptation, her ability to rise to meet new expectations. I just hadn't realized that part of that transformation involved leaving me behind. Perfect. Chloe announced after what felt like dozens of shots. Now let's get some candids of the bride with her mother. Helen, right? I want to capture that special mother-daughter bond. Special bond. I glanced at Sophia, who was checking her phone while Chloe adjusted her camera settings. Sophia, honey, can you put the phone away for just a moment? Chloe asked. Sorry, it's just, Mom, did you handle the thing with the caterer? She seemed really stressed about something. The thing with the caterer. As if my financial crisis was just another item on her wedding day checklist. I'm working on it, I said. Good. Marcus's dad was asking about it. He offered to take care of it, but I told him you had it handled. You do have it handled, right? Marcus's dad had offered to pay. Of course he had. For him, $847 was probably what he spent on lunch. For me, it was a crisis that could derail the entire reception. Right, I said. Chloe positioned us under a flowering archway, Sophia's hand on my arm, both of us smiling for the camera. But as the shutter clicked, I found myself thinking about Marcus's father's offer. How easy it would be to let him solve this problem. How grateful Sophia would be. How it would cement my position as the charity case in the family, the one who couldn't quite manage her own responsibilities. These are gorgeous, Chloe said, reviewing the shots. You can really see the love between you two. Love. Yes, I loved my daughter. But as I stood there watching her scroll through her phone again, checking texts from friends who were probably at brunches and shopping trips I could never afford, I realized that love had become a one-way street somewhere along the way. Mom, I need to go get my makeup touched up, Sophia said, already walking away. The ceremony starts in 45 minutes. You're going to change and come back for the reception, right? The photographer wants to get some shots of you and Marcus's parents during the cocktail hour. Shots of me and Marcus's parents. The woman who owned 3 businesses and the man who collected vintage cars posed with the diner waitress who was currently short $847 for her own daughter's wedding catering bill. Sure, sweetheart. She was already gone, hurrying back toward the bridal suite with her bridesmaids trailing behind her like expensive accessories. I stood alone in the garden for a moment, surrounded by flowers I couldn't afford and decorations. That would be gone by tomorrow, thinking about the conversation I'd overheard at Sophia's engagement party 6 months ago. I'd been in the kitchen, refilling the ice bucket, when I heard Marcus's sister talking to one of the bridesmaids. "I just feel bad for Sophia," she'd said. "Can you imagine having to plan a wedding with no help from your family? I mean, financially speaking. Thank God Marcus's parents are so generous." "What about her mom?" the bridesmaid had asked. "Oh, Helen's sweet, but she's just a waitress. Sophia's basically been on her own since high school. It's actually pretty inspiring how well she's done for herself, considering her background, considering her mother, considering everything she'd had to overcome, including me. I'd stayed in that kitchen for 10 minutes afterward, pretending to organize appetizers while I processed what I'd heard. My daughter hadn't corrected them. Hadn't mentioned the second mortgage I'd taken to pay for her college expenses that weren't covered by her scholarship. Hadn't talked about the car I'd bought her, or the professional wardrobe I'd funded for her first job, or the security deposit I'd provided for her apartment. She'd let them believe she'd done it all herself. At the time, I'd told myself it was understandable. She was trying to fit in with Marcus's crowd, and admitting that her mother was still supporting her financially might make her seem less independent, less accomplished. But now, standing in this garden at this wedding I'd bankrupted myself to provide, I wondered if there was more to it than that. My phone rang. Sarah Mitchell, the real estate agent. "Helen. How's the wedding going? I bet Sophia looks absolutely stunning." "She does," I said, walking further away from the venue toward the parking lot. "Sarah, that conversation we had last month about the house, is that offer still on the table?" "Of course." "Helen, are you serious? You're finally ready to sell?" I looked back at the manor, at the windows glowing with warm light, at the elegant figures moving through the rooms like characters in a movie I wasn't part of. "How quickly could we close?" "Well, it's a hot market right now. I could probably get you multiple offers by Wednesday if we list Monday. With the right buyer, we could close in 2 weeks, maybe 3. 2 weeks. In 2 weeks, I could have enough money to pay off the second mortgage, clear my credit cards, and still have a substantial amount left over. Enough to rent a nice apartment, maybe even take a vacation for the first time in 15 years. But Helen," Sarah continued, "are you sure about this? I know how much that house means to you. And what will Sophia think?" "What would Sophia think? Would she even notice?" She had Marcus's world now, Marcus's family, Marcus's future. The modest 3-bedroom house where she'd grown up was just a relic of a life she'd outgrown. "I need to think about it," I said. "Of course. But Helen? If you're serious, don't wait too long. The market's good now, but these things can change." I hung up and walked to my car, sitting behind the wheel while I watched the last of the guests arrive for the ceremony. Luxury cars filled the parking lot, their owners dressed in clothes that cost more than my monthly salary. Through the windows, I could see the wedding party lining up. Sophia in her $8,000 dress, looking like a princess from a fairy tale. Marcus in his custom tuxedo, every inch the successful young lawyer. The bridesmaids and groomsmen, all of them beautiful and polished and perfectly at home in this world of casual elegance, and somewhere inside, Patricia was probably checking her watch, waiting for me to come up with money I didn't have for upgrades. I hadn't approved to a wedding I was too embarrassing to attend. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found a number I hadn't called in 3 years. David Chen, my ex-boyfriend from before I met Sophia's father. He'd been a good man, stable, kind, genuinely interested in building a life together. But I'd been young and stupid and convinced that love was supposed to be dramatic and unpredictable. David had gone on to become a successful accountant. He'd married a nice woman, had 2 kids, built the kind of steady, comfortable life I'd once thought was boring, the kind of life that looked pretty appealing from where I sat now. I didn't call him. But the fact that I'd even thought about it Told me something important. I was tired. Bone deep, soul-weary tired of being the one who sacrificed, who managed, who made everything work while everyone else got to be selfish. The ceremony music began to play inside the manor. Pachelbel's canon in D, just like Sophia had dreamed of since she was little. I'd promised her then that someday she'd have her perfect wedding, complete with the song that made her cry happy tears when she heard it in movies. I'd kept that promise. But the cost had been higher than I'd ever imagined. My phone buzzed with another text from my boss. Helen, really need to know about tonight. It's Saturday rush and we're desperate. I stared at the message for a long moment. Then I typed back. I'll be there at 6. 6 o'clock would be right in the middle of the reception. Right when the father-daughter dance should be happening, except there was no father, so Marcus's father would probably dance with both his new daughter-in-law and his own wife while I served burgers to customers who'd leave their tables messy. And tip me in loose change, but it would give me $224 toward the catering bill. It would show Patricia I was trying. It would let me maintain the illusion of being a responsible mother for just a little bit longer, even if it meant missing the rest of my daughter's wedding day, even if she probably wouldn't notice I was gone. I drove home in a daze, the wedding ceremony music still echoing in my ears from the parking lot. My house, the modest 3-bedroom ranch I'd called home for 18 years, looked smaller than usual as I pulled into the driveway. The paint was peeling around the window frames, and the front steps had a crack I'd been meaning to fix for 3 years but never had the money or energy to address. Inside, everything felt foreign, like I was seeing it through someone else's eyes. The furniture I'd collected piece by piece from garage sales and clearance racks suddenly looked shabby rather than homey. The family photos lining the hallway, Sophia's school pictures, her graduation, birthdays celebrated at Chuck E. Cheese because it was all I could afford, felt like artifacts from someone else's life. I walked into my bedroom and opened the closet, staring at my pathetic selection of formal wear. The black funeral dress hung next to 2 other dresses I'd bought on clearance over the years, none of them appropriate for a wedding reception at Rosewood Manor. Behind them, pushed to the back, was a garment bag I hadn't opened in 15 years. My hands trembled as I pulled it out and unzipped it slowly. Inside was the wedding dress I'd never worn, not Sophia's father. That relationship had been a whirlwind disaster that lasted 6 months and ended when I told him I was pregnant. No, this dress was from before that, from a time when I'd believed in fairy tale endings for myself. Robert Kellerman. I hadn't thought his name in years, but standing there with my wedding dress in my hands, I could see his face as clearly as if he were standing in front of me. Kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, gentle hands that never raised in anger, a stable job at the insurance company where he'd worked his way up from claims adjuster to regional manager. We'd been engaged for 8 months when I met Sophia's father at a bar downtown. Danny Morrison, charming, reckless, full of grand plans and bigger promises. He'd swept me off my feet with his stories about starting a construction company, about the house he'd build for me, about the life we'd have together. I'd broken Robert's heart to chase that fantasy. Called off our wedding 3 weeks before the ceremony, returned his grandmother's ring, and watched him drive away with the quiet dignity that had made me feel safe but not excited. Danny had disappeared when Sophia was 3 months old, leaving behind nothing but debt and a daughter who would grow up asking why other kids had daddies and she didn't. I'd kept the dress all these years, telling myself it was because I couldn't afford to replace the good fabric if I ever got married again. But the truth was more complicated than that. The dress represented the woman I'd been before, the one who'd believed she deserved love and stability, who'd thought she had options, who'd made choices based on what she wanted rather than what everyone else needed. Now, holding it up against myself in the mirror, I could see how naive that woman had been. The dress was a size 8, I was probably a 12 now after years of stress eating and too little sleep. The ivory silk had yellowed slightly with age, and the delicate beadwork looked outdated, old-fashioned, just like me. My phone rang, startling me out of my reverie. I expected it to be Sophia, or maybe Patricia from the catering company, but the caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize. Mrs. Morrison? This is Detective Sarah Walsh with the Fraud Division. I'm calling about some unusual activity on your credit cards. My blood ran cold. What kind of activity? Someone's been trying to use your information to make purchases online. We've blocked the transactions, but I need to verify some recent charges with you. Did you authorize a payment to Rosewood Manor Catering for $3,847 this morning? No. I said automatically, then caught myself. I mean, yes, I tried to make that payment, but my cards were declined. That's what's strange, Detective Walsh said. According to our records, the payment went through on your MasterCard at 11:23 a.m. But that card's been over its limit for 3 weeks. I pulled up my banking app with shaking hands. There it was, a charge for $3,847 to Rosewood Manor Catering, posted just 2 hours ago. My available credit showed negative $2,100. I don't understand, I whispered. How is that possible? That's what we're trying to figure out. Mrs. Morrison, I'm going to need you to come down to the station to file a report. This looks like identity theft, possibly someone with access to your personal information. Identity theft. The words swirled around in my head as I tried to make sense of what was happening. Someone had used my card to pay for wedding expenses I couldn't afford, running up debt that would take me years to pay off, but who? And why? Mrs. Morrison? Are you still there? Yes, when do you need me to come in? As soon as possible. This kind of fraud can snowball quickly if we don't act fast. I hung up the phone and sat heavily on my bed, still holding the wedding dress. The irony was almost laughable. Someone had solved my catering crisis by committing a crime in my name. Patricia would get her money, the reception would go smoothly. And I'd be left dealing with the aftermath. My phone buzzed with a text from Sophia, Mom. The caterer said everything's taken care of. Thank you so much for figuring it out. You're amazing. 2 hearts, amazing. I stared at the heart emoji, trying to reconcile my daughter's gratitude with the growing suspicion forming in the back of my mind. Another text, this one from Marcus, Helen, thank you for handling the catering situation. Sophia was so stressed about it. You really saved the day. They both knew the payment had gone through. They were both thanking me for something I hadn't done, couldn't have done with my maxed out credit cards and empty bank account, unless I walked to Sophia's old room, which I'd kept exactly as she'd left it when she moved in with Marcus last year. Her desk still had the laptop I'd bought her for college, the one she'd said was too slow for her work now that she had a company-issued computer. I opened it up and waited for it to boot. Her email was still logged in. I knew I shouldn't look. This was a violation of her privacy, a betrayal of trust. But something was nagging at me, a mother's instinct that something wasn't right. The recent emails were mostly wedding-related. Confirmations from vendors, discussions with bridesmaids about dress fittings, back and forth with the photographer about shot lists. But buried in the sent folder from 3 days ago was an email that made my stomach drop. To patricia.chen@rosewoodcatering.com from sophia.morrison@gmail.com. Subject: Payment authorization. Hi Patricia, I wanted to confirm the payment method for Saturday's event. My mother has been having some financial difficulties lately. Don't tell her I told you that. So Marcus's father has agreed to cover any additional costs. He's given me his credit card information to handle the final payment. However, I think it would be better for everyone if the charge appears to go through on my mother's card instead. She's very proud and would be embarrassed to have Mr. Whitmore pay for her daughter's wedding. Could you process the payment using the card information I'm attaching, but show it as coming from Helen Morrison's account? I know this is unusual, but it would mean so much to our family to handle this discreetly. Thanks for understanding. Sophia. I read the email 3 times before the full implications sank in. Sophia had arranged for Marcus's father to pay the catering bill, but had asked Patricia to make it look like it came from my account. She'd known I couldn't afford the additional charges, known I was struggling financially, and instead of being honest about accepting help, she'd created an elaborate deception. She'd let me panic about the money. Let me stress about disappointing her on her wedding day. Let me agree to work a double shift during her reception to try to cover costs she knew were already paid. But why? Why go through such an elaborate charade? I scrolled through more emails, looking for clues. There was a thread between Sophia and Marcus from 2 weeks ago that made everything crystal clear to Marcus. Dad's happy to help with the wedding costs. He knows your mom is doing her best, but this is getting expensive. Sophia, I appreciate it, but I don't want anyone to know my mother can't afford this. It's embarrassing enough that she's a waitress. If your parents start paying for things, everyone will know exactly how broke we are. Marcus, nobody would judge you for that. Sophomore Sophia, easy for you to say. You've never been the scholarship kid, the one whose mom drives a car that breaks down in the school parking lot. I've worked so hard to build a different image of myself. I can't have your family thinking I'm some kind of charity case, Marcus, so what do you want to do? Sophia, let your dad pay for whatever needs to be covered, but make it look like it's coming from my mom's accounts. That way everyone thinks we can handle it ourselves, and nobody has to know the truth about our finances. Marcus, isn't that kind of, I don't know, dishonest, Sophia? It's protecting my mother's dignity. She'd be mortified if she knew your family was paying for my wedding. This way everyone wins. I closed the laptop and walked to the bathroom, where I threw up everything I'd eaten that day. My daughter hadn't just excluded me from her wedding ceremony because I embarrassed her, she'd created an elaborate financial deception to hide the extent of my poverty from her new family. She'd known about my struggles. Known I was working extra shifts and skipping meals to pay for her perfect day. Known I was sacrificing my health and my future to give her what she wanted, and instead of accepting that sacrifice with gratitude, or finding a way to help me without hurting my pride, she'd chosen to hide behind a lie that made it look like I was more capable than I actually was. My phone rang again. Detective Walsh. Mrs. Morrison, I've been looking into this further, and I need to ask you something. Do you have reason to believe someone in your family might have access to your credit card information? The question hung in the air like an accusation. I thought about Sophia growing up in this house, watching me balance checkbooks at the kitchen table, seeing me pull out my wallet to pay for groceries and gas and school supplies. She'd have memorized my card numbers without even trying. Mrs. Morrison? I think I know what happened, I said. But I need some time to sort it out. Ma'am, if you know who's been using your cards, you need to tell me. This is a serious crime. A serious crime. My daughter, my beautiful, brilliant daughter who was getting married in 2 hours, had committed credit card fraud. Not to hurt me, but to protect herself from the embarrassment of having a poor mother. I need to make some calls, I said. Can I call you back in an hour? Detective Walsh agreed reluctantly, and I hung up knowing I had a choice to make. I could report Sophia to the police and watch her perfect wedding day turn into a legal nightmare. I could confront her and demand an explanation, ruining her reception with family drama. Or I could do what I'd always done, protect her, even when it hurt me. My phone buzzed with another text from Sophia. Mom, where are you? The reception's starting soon and people are asking about you. Did you find something to wear? I looked at myself in the bedroom mirror. Still in the discount navy dress that had started this whole nightmare. Still the embarrassment, the problem to be managed, the mother who wasn't quite good enough for the life her daughter had built. But for the first time in 23 years, I found myself wondering, what would happen if I stopped protecting her? What would happen if I let her face the consequences of her choices without me there to cushion the fall? The wedding dress was still lying on the bed, a ghost of the woman I used to be. I picked it up and held it against myself again, and this time I didn't see how old or outdated it looked. I saw a woman who'd once believed she deserved to be treated with respect. A woman who'd made her own choices, even when they were wrong. A woman who'd never had to hide her mother's poverty or lie about her family's finances. Maybe it was time to remember what that felt like. I reached for my phone and dialed Sarah Mitchell's number. Sarah? It's Helen. About the house, I want to list it tomorrow. Helen, are you absolutely certain about this? Sarah Mitchell's voice carried concern mixed with excitement. Once we sign the listing agreement, this becomes real very quickly. I stood in my living room, looking at the framed photo of Sophia's high school graduation on the mantel. In the picture, she was beaming in her cap and gown, holding her valedictorian medal while I stood beside her in a dress I'd bought specifically for the occasion, not because it was pretty, but because it was on clearance and I needed something that wouldn't embarrass her in front of her classmates' parents. I'm certain, I said, signing my name with more confidence than I'd felt in years. When can you start showing it? I'll have the photographer here tomorrow morning for the listing photos. We can have it on the market by Tuesday. Sarah paused, gathering her papers. Helen, what's brought this on so suddenly? This morning you were getting ready for Sophia's wedding, and now I'm remembering what it's like to make decisions for myself instead of for everyone else. Sarah left with promises to call me Monday morning with a marketing strategy. I sat alone in the living room that would soon belong to strangers, feeling simultaneously terrified and liberated. For the first time in decades, I was about to have money of my own, not money earmarked for Sophia's education or emergencies. Or her future, but money I could spend however I chose. The thought was dizzying. My phone buzzed with another text from Sophia. Mom, seriously, where are you? The cocktail hour is almost over and Marcus's grandmother keeps asking about you. She wants to meet the woman who raised such a wonderful daughter. The woman who raised such a wonderful daughter. I wondered what Marcus's grandmother would think. If she knew that wonderful daughter had committed credit card fraud to avoid the embarrassment of admitting her mother was poor. I was about to put the phone down when it rang. An unknown number, but something made me answer. Mrs. Morrison? This is Robert Kellerman. The name hit me like a physical blow. I hadn't heard his voice in 15 years, but it was unmistakably him, still gentle, still careful with his words. Robert, I managed. Why are you calling? I saw the announcement in the paper about Sophia's wedding. I just wanted to say congratulations. I know how proud you must be. Proud. The word felt strange in my mouth. Was I proud? 24 hours ago, I would have said yes without hesitation. My daughter was marrying into a wealthy family, starting a life filled with opportunities I'd never had. But now, thank you, I said. That's very kind of you to call. Helen, I hope this isn't inappropriate, but I've thought about you over the years. About us. I know things ended badly between us, but I never stopped hoping you were happy. I closed my eyes, remembering the last conversation we'd had. He'd come to my apartment to get his things after I'd broken our engagement, and he'd asked me one question. Are you sure this is what you want, Helen? Are you sure he's going to give you the life you deserve? I'd been so certain then. So sure that Danny's passionate promises were worth more than Robert's quiet stability. So convinced that dramatic love was better than gentle love. I made a lot of mistakes back then, I said. We all did. But look at you now, you raised an amazing daughter all by yourself. That takes incredible strength. Amazing daughter. There was that phrase again. Everyone seemed to see something in Sophia that I was suddenly struggling to recognize. Robert, can I ask you something? Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I'd made different choices? Every day for the first 5 years, he said with a laugh that held no bitterness. But Helen, you can't live in the past. I learned that the hard way. Are you happy? Did you find someone? I did. Margaret. We've been married 12 years now. 2 kids, Emily's 10, and Jake just turned 7. Margaret's a teacher, and she's exactly what I needed. Steady. Kind. She makes me laugh. Steady. Kind. The qualities I'd once found boring now sounded like the most precious things in the world. I'm glad, I said, and meant it. You deserve that. So did you, Helen. So do you. After he hung up, I sat holding the phone, thinking about the life I'd rejected 15 years ago. Robert had offered me stability, partnership, a future where I wouldn't have to carry all the responsibility alone. I'd thrown it away for 6 months of passion with a man who'd left me pregnant and broke, but if I hadn't made that choice, there would be no Sophia. And despite everything that had happened today, despite the lies and the fraud and the humiliation, she was still my daughter. The best thing I'd ever done, even if she couldn't see past her own shame to appreciate the sacrifice it had taken to raise her. My phone rang again. This time it was Detective Walsh. Mrs. Morrison, I need an answer about that fraud case. If you know who used your cards, you need to tell me now, or I'll have to assume you're being uncooperative with the investigation. I thought about Sophia. In her wedding dress, dancing with her new husband, surrounded by people who thought she'd overcome her humble beginnings through hard work and determination. She had no idea that her perfect day was built on a crime that could destroy her future. Detective Walsh, I think there's been a misunderstanding. I did authorize that payment to the caterer. Ma'am, that's not what you told me an hour ago. I know. I was confused. I'd forgotten about giving my card information to someone to handle the payment for me. It's all legitimate. The lie came easier than I'd expected. After all, I'd been lying to protect Sophia her entire life. What was one more? Mrs. Morrison, are you sure about this? If you're being coerced or threatened, I'm not. It was my mistake. I'm sorry for wasting your time. I hung up before she could ask more questions and immediately called my credit card company to confirm that I would accept responsibility for the charges. It would take me 3 years to pay off the debt, even with the money from selling the house. But it would keep Sophia from facing criminal charges on her wedding day. One last sacrifice. One last time of choosing her well-being over my own, but it was also the last time. After today, she would have to learn to live with the consequences of her choices without me there to cushion every fall. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Helen, Sophia's getting worried about you. Are you okay? Do you need someone to come get you? Someone to come get me. Like I was a child who'd gotten lost at the mall. I looked around my house one more time, at the comfortable furniture I'd chosen carefully over the years, at the photos documenting our life together, at the garden visible through the kitchen window where I'd taught Sophia to plant tomatoes when she was 5. This house held every memory of her childhood. Her first steps in the hallway, her homework sessions at the kitchen table, the Christmas mornings when we'd opened presents together under a tree we'd decorated with handmade ornaments because store-bought ones weren't in the budget, and she was ready to let me sell it without a second thought, as long as it gave her the financial independence she craved. I went to my bedroom and opened the jewelry box on my dresser. Inside was the diamond necklace my mother had left me, the only valuable thing I owned besides the house. I'd planned to give it to Sophia on her wedding day, continuing a family tradition that stretched back 3 generations. Instead, I put it in my purse. I drove back to Rosewood Manor for the 3rd time that day, but this time I didn't park in the back lot like a vendor or employee. I pulled right up to the front entrance, where the valet was still taking keys from guests arriving fashionably late to the reception. "Good evening, ma'am," the young man said politely. "Are you here for the Morrison Whitmore wedding?" "I am. I'm the bride's mother." If he was surprised by my modest appearance compared to the other wedding guests, he didn't show it. He took my keys with the same professional courtesy he'd shown everyone else. Inside, the reception was in full swing. The ballroom glowed with soft lighting, and the band was playing something jazzy and sophisticated. Sophia was on the dance floor with Marcus, looking radiant in the way that only brides can. Her dress caught the light as she spun, and her laugh carried across the room like music. She was beautiful. She was happy. And she had no idea that the perfect wedding she was enjoying had been paid for with fraud committed in her mother's name. Helen. Marcus's father appeared at my elbow, scotch in hand and a broad smile on his face. "There you are. We were starting to worry." William Whitmore Sr. was everything a successful businessman should be: confident, well-dressed, comfortable in his own skin. The kind of man who'd never worried about making rent or choosing between groceries and gas money. The kind of man who could pay an extra $800 for wedding upgrades without blinking. "Mr. Whitmore," I said. "Thank you for everything you've done today. Please, call me Bill. And I haven't done anything special, just enjoyed watching 2 young people start their life together." He was lying, of course. He'd done quite a lot, actually. He'd paid for wedding expenses I couldn't afford, then helped orchestrate a deception to hide that fact from his own family and friends. He'd made it possible for Sophia to maintain her facade of financial independence while ensuring her wedding went off without a hitch, and he'd done it all while allowing me to believe I was failing my daughter on the most important day of her life. "Helen, there you are." Sophia appeared beside us, slightly breathless from dancing. Up close, I could see the fine layer of perspiration on her forehead, the slight smudging of her carefully applied makeup. She was human after all, not the perfect princess she appeared to be from across the room. "Mom, you look..." She paused, taking in my unchanged appearance, still the navy dress, still the same modest jewelry, still obviously out of place among the designer-clad guests. "You look nice." Nice. Not beautiful, not elegant, not appropriate for the occasion. Just nice, in the way you might compliment a child's drawing even when it's clearly inferior to professional art. "Thank you, sweetheart. You look stunning. Absolutely radiant." And she did. The fraud, the lies, the deception, none of it showed on her face. She looked like exactly what she was, a young woman in love, celebrating the beginning of her new life. "I was so worried when you didn't show up for the ceremony," she continued. "But Marcus's dad explained that you were handling some last-minute details. Thank you for taking care of everything, as always." As always. The phrase that summed up 23 years of motherhood. Helen will take care of it. Helen will figure it out. Helen will make it work, whatever the cost to herself. "Actually, Sophia, I think we need to talk," I said. "Privately." Her smile faltered slightly. "Now? In the middle of my reception?" Now. Bill must have sensed the tension because he quietly excused himself, leaving mother and daughter alone in the middle of the crowded ballroom. Around us, guests continued to celebrate, but I felt like we were standing in a bubble of silence. Mom, what's wrong? You're scaring me. I know about the emails, Sophia. I know about the payment arrangement you made with Marcus's father. The color drained from her face, but to her credit, she didn't try to deny it. How did your laptop? Your email was still logged in. She looked around nervously, checking to make sure no one was listening to our conversation. Even now, her first concern was maintaining appearances. Mom, I can explain, can you? Can you explain why you committed credit card fraud instead of just asking for help? Can you explain why you let me panic about money I didn't have while you knew the bills were already paid? I was trying to protect you, she whispered urgently. I knew you'd be embarrassed if Marcus's family had to pay for my wedding. I was trying to preserve your dignity. My dignity? The word came out louder than I'd intended, causing a few nearby guests to glance our way. I lowered my voice. Sophia, do you have any idea what you've done? I spent the day talking to fraud investigators. I could have reported you to the police. You could have been arrested on your wedding day. But you didn't report me, she said, and I could hear the confidence creeping back into her voice. Because you knew I was trying to help. Help? I stared at my daughter, seeing her clearly for perhaps the first time in years. Sophia, you weren't trying to help me. You were trying to help yourself. You were embarrassed by my poverty, so you found a way to hide it. This was never about protecting my dignity, it was about protecting your image. That's not true, it is true. And what's worse is that you don't even see it. You've convinced yourself that lying and fraud were somehow noble acts because they served your purposes. Sophia's eyes filled with tears, but I couldn't tell if they were from remorse or from being caught. Mom, please don't do this. Not tonight. Not at my wedding. When would be a good time, Sophia? When would it be convenient for you to acknowledge that what you did was wrong? I'm sorry, she whispered. I'm sorry I hurt you. But I was just trying to make everything perfect. I wanted this day to be special, and I knew if everyone found out about our situation, it would ruin everything. Our situation. She couldn't even say the word poor. Couldn't acknowledge that her mother was a waitress who lived paycheck to paycheck, who'd sacrificed everything to give her daughter opportunities she'd never had. Sophia, I said carefully, what do you think would happen if people knew the truth about our finances? What exactly are you so afraid of? She looked around the ballroom, at the elegant guests, the expensive decorations, the life she was marrying into. I'm afraid they'll think I don't belong here. That I'm not good enough for Marcus, for this family, for this life. And there it was. The truth she'd been running from her entire adult life. She was ashamed of where she came from, ashamed of me, ashamed of the sacrifices that had made her success possible. Sweetheart, I said gently, if these people would judge you for having a mother who worked hard to provide for you, then they're not worth impressing. And if Marcus's love for you depends on hiding who you really are, then it's not real love. You don't understand, she said, wiping her eyes carefully to avoid smearing her makeup. You've never had to prove yourself in a world like this. You've never had to convince people that you're more than just your background. You're right, I said. I haven't. I've been too busy working to pay for your education, your car, your apartment, and your wedding to worry about what people might think of me. The words hung between us like a verdict. Around us, the party continued, people laughing, dancing, celebrating the beginning of Sophia and Marcus's new life together. But in our small bubble of truth, everything had changed. I love you, Sophia. I said finally. I've loved you every day of your life, and I always will. But I won't lie for you anymore. And I won't let you pretend that my love and sacrifice don't exist just because they're inconvenient for your image. I reached into my purse and pulled out my mother's diamond necklace. This was going to be your wedding gift. It belonged to my mother, and her mother before that. But I think I'll keep it. Maybe someday you'll understand what it really means to sacrifice for someone you love. I turned to walk away, but Sophia grabbed my arm. Mom, please don't leave like this. Please don't ruin my wedding day. I looked at my daughter, my beautiful, successful, ungrateful daughter, and felt something inside me finally break free. I'm not ruining anything, Sophia. I'm just finally stopping trying to fix everything for you. It's time you learned to live with the consequences of your choices. I walked away from her, through the ballroom filled with people who would never know the real cost of the perfect wedding they were enjoying, and out into the night air where I could finally breathe freely. Behind me, the music played on, and the celebration continued. But for the first time in 23 years, I wasn't there to make sure everything went according to plan, and it felt like freedom. I sat in my car outside Rosewood Manor for 20 minutes, engine running, watching the golden light spill from the ballroom windows while my hands shook on the steering wheel. Inside, my daughter was probably explaining my abrupt departure to concerned guests, crafting some story that painted me as the unstable mother who couldn't handle her emotions on such an important day. The thought should have hurt. 6 hours ago, it would have sent me running back inside to apologize, to smooth things over, to protect Sophia from any embarrassment my behavior might cause. But now I felt something I hadn't experienced in decades, the strange, terrifying freedom of not caring what other people thought about me. My phone had been buzzing constantly, texts from Sophia, calls from Marcus, even a message from his mother, asking if I was feeling well. I turned it off and drove home through streets that looked different somehow, as if I was seeing my neighborhood for the first time. Inside my house, I poured myself a glass of the cheap wine I kept for cooking, and sat at my kitchen table with the real estate documents Sarah had left. The listing agreement was already signed, but now I pulled out the folder of comparable sales she'd prepared and really looked at the numbers. My modest 3-bedroom house, purchased 18 years ago for $127,000, was now worth $340,000. After paying off the mortgages and real estate fees, I'd walk away with approximately $180,000. More money than I'd ever had at one time in my life. The realization was staggering. While I'd been scraping together money for Sophia's college expenses and wedding costs, treating myself like I was perpetually broke, I'd been sitting on a small fortune. I could buy a nice condo in cash, have money left over for travel, maybe even go back to school myself. The life I'd always told myself I couldn't afford had been possible all along. I just hadn't been willing to prioritize myself over my daughter's future security. I was still processing this when headlights swept across my front window. A car had pulled into my driveway, a sleek black BMW that definitely didn't belong to any of my neighbors. Through the window, I watched Marcus climb out, still in his wedding tuxedo, and walk toward my front door with the determined stride of someone who was used to solving problems through direct confrontation. The doorbell rang 3 times before I answered it. Helen. He stood on my front porch looking perfectly composed despite having left his own wedding reception to come here. We need to talk. Do we? I would think you'd want to get back to your wife and your guests. Sophia is upset. Very upset. And I don't appreciate you causing a scene at our wedding. I stepped back and gestured for him to come inside, partly because I was curious what he had to say and partly because I didn't want to give my neighbors more gossip material than I'd already provided. In my living room, Marcus looked around with barely concealed judgment, taking in the department store furniture, the discount store art on the walls, the general shabbiness that money couldn't fix when you never had enough of it to spare. Helen, I know you're angry about the payment arrangement, but Sophia was trying to help you. She was trying to preserve your dignity. By committing fraud. By making sure you didn't have to be embarrassed in front of our families. She knew you'd be mortified if people found out you couldn't afford the wedding, so she found a solution that worked for everyone. I sat down in my worn armchair and looked at this young man who thought he understood my situation better than I did. Marcus, do you know why I took a second mortgage on this house? I know. To pay for Sophia's senior year of college when her scholarship didn't cover all the expenses. Do you know why I drive a 15-year-old car? Helen, because I used the money I'd saved for a new car to pay the security deposit on Sophia's first apartment. Do you know why I haven't been to a dentist in 3 years? He was starting to look uncomfortable, shifting from foot to foot in his expensive shoes. Because I've been paying for wedding expenses for the past year and a half. The venue deposit, the photographer, the flowers, the dress, all of it came from my savings, my credit cards, my future financial security. I didn't know, he said quietly. Of course you didn't know. Because Sophia has spent years carefully crafting an image of independence that doesn't include acknowledging her mother's sacrifices. She's let you and your family believe that she pulled herself up by her bootstraps, that her success is entirely self-made. Marcus sat down heavily on my couch, his perfect posture finally sagging. She's proud. She doesn't like asking for help. She's not proud, Marcus. She's ashamed. There's a difference. I got up and went to the kitchen, returning with the bottle of wine and a second glass. Marcus accepted it gratefully, and we sat in silence for a moment while he processed what I'd told him. What Sophia did today, I continued, wasn't about protecting me. It was about protecting herself from the embarrassment of having a poor mother. She was willing to commit a crime rather than let your family know the truth about our financial situation. But she loves you. She talks about you all the time. I'm sure she does. But loving someone and being ashamed of them aren't mutually exclusive. Sophia loves the idea of me, the devoted mother who sacrificed everything for her daughter's success. She just doesn't want anyone to see the messy reality of what that sacrifice actually looks like. Marcus drank his wine and stared at the family photos on my mantel. She said you threatened to ruin her wedding day. I told her I wouldn't lie for her anymore. Apparently, that's the same thing in her mind. My phone, which I'd turned back on when Marcus arrived, buzzed with another text. This one was from Linda. Just saw Sophia's wedding photos on Facebook. Beautiful. But where are you in the pictures? Where indeed? The mother who'd paid for the wedding, planned every detail, sacrificed her financial future to make it perfect, and who'd been edited out of the official narrative like an inconvenient mistake. Helen, Marcus said carefully, what would it take to fix this? What do you want from Sophia? It was such a young person's question, the assumption that every problem had a negotiable solution if you just found the right currency to offer. I want her to stop being ashamed of me, I said. I want her to acknowledge that my love and sacrifice matter, even if they're not convenient for her image. I want her to understand that you can't build a life on lies and expect it to last. That's a lot to ask. Is it? Is it really too much to ask your daughter to treat you with basic respect and honesty? Marcus finished his wine and set the glass down carefully on my coffee table. She's scared, you know. She's terrified that I'll realize she's not good enough for my family, that she doesn't really belong in our world. And do you think that? Do you think she's not good enough? Of course not. I love her. I love her work ethic, her intelligence, her determination. I love that she earned everything she has. But she didn't earn everything she has, Marcus. A significant portion of her success was subsidized by my sacrifices. And until she can acknowledge that without shame, she's building her life on a foundation that isn't solid. We sat in contemplative silence until another car pulled into my driveway. This time it was a modest Honda, Sophia's car, the one I'd helped her buy when she graduated college. She climbed out still wearing her wedding dress, the elaborate train dragging slightly on my gravel driveway. She followed me, Marcus said, sounding unsurprised. She always was persistent. Sophia didn't bother with the doorbell, just opened the front door and walked in like she still lived there. Her makeup was streaked from crying, and her perfectly arranged hair was starting to come undone. Mom, please, she said without preamble. Please don't let it end like this. I looked at my daughter in her $8,000 wedding dress, standing in the living room of the house she was ashamed to call home, begging me not to ruin her perfect day by insisting on honesty. Sophia, sit down. You're going to trip on that dress. She perched carefully on the edge of the couch next to Marcus, the elaborate gown pooling around her like expensive armor. Even disheveled and tear-stained, she was beautiful. Even caught in lies and fraud, she was my daughter. I know you're angry, she began, but I'm not angry anymore, I interrupted, and realized it was true. Somewhere between confronting her at the reception and sitting here with my wine, the anger had transformed into something else. Something calmer and more resolute. I'm just done. Done with what? Done pretending that your shame doesn't hurt me. Done accepting that I'll always be the family secret you have to manage. Done sacrificing my financial security for someone who's embarrassed to acknowledge that sacrifice. Sophia's face crumpled. I'm not embarrassed by you. I'm embarrassed by the situation. By not being able to afford things myself. By needing help when I'm supposed to be an independent adult. Sweetheart, everyone needs help. Marcus's parents helped him through law school. They gave him a car, probably helped with his apartment, maybe even helped with job connections. But that doesn't diminish his accomplishments, does it? That's different, Sophia protested. How? How is it different? Because they can afford it without sacrificing anything. When you help me, it costs you everything. It costs you your retirement, your health, your ability to take care of yourself. And that makes me feel guilty, which makes me feel angry, which makes me want to hide the whole situation. It was the most honest thing she'd said all day, and it broke my heart a little. Because I could see the twisted logic that had led her to this point, the guilt that had morphed into shame, the shame that had justified the lies. Sophia, I said gently, that guilt you feel? That's called conscience. It's your moral compass telling you that something isn't right about this arrangement. But what was I supposed to do? Let you pay for everything and then announce to everyone that my mother went into debt for my wedding? How does that help anyone? You could have said no to the expensive wedding. You could have insisted on something we could actually afford. You could have accepted Marcus's family's help graciously instead of hiding it behind fraud. But you wanted everything. You wanted the perfect wedding, the perfect image, the perfect story where you overcame your humble beginnings. Without anyone having to see the actual cost of that overcoming. Marcus had been silent through this exchange, but now he spoke up. Sophia, your mother is right. We could have had a beautiful wedding for half the cost. We could have been honest with everyone about the financial arrangements. We chose not to because we were both worried about appearances. Sophia turned to him with surprise. You were worried too? Of course I was. I was worried my parents would think you were only marrying me for money if they knew about your family's financial situation. I was worried they'd be condescending. Or try to fix everything. So I went along with the deception because it seemed easier than dealing with the truth. The three of us sat in my modest living room, the bride in her expensive gown, the groom in his designer tuxedo, and the mother in her discount store dress, finally being honest with each other for the first time in months. So where does this leave us? Sophia asked quietly. I looked at my daughter, this brilliant, beautiful, complicated woman I'd raised, and felt the familiar tug of maternal love warring with the new strength of self-preservation. It leaves us with a choice, I said. You can keep living the lie you've created, where your success is entirely self-made and I'm just an inconvenient reminder of where you came from. Or you can choose to be honest about our relationship, about the sacrifices we've both made, and about building your marriage on truth instead of shame. And if I choose the truth? What happens then? I picked up the real estate papers from the coffee table and showed them to her. Then I sell this house and start living my own life instead of subsidizing yours. I use the money to secure my own future instead of constantly worrying about yours. I stop being your safety net and start being your mother. Sophia stared at the listing agreement like it was a death sentence. You're really going to sell our house? It's not our house, sweetheart. It's my house. And yes, I'm going to sell it and buy something smaller that I can afford without working myself into an early grave. But where will I, what if I need? She couldn't finish the sentences, but I knew what she was asking. What if she needed a place to come home to? What if her perfect life fell apart and she needed somewhere to retreat? Then you'll figure it out, just like any other adult would. Just like I had to figure it out when I was 20 and pregnant and your father disappeared. The words hung in the air like a challenge. For the first time in 23 years, I was refusing to be Sophia's backup plan. I need to think about this, she said finally. Take all the time you need. But understand that this decision isn't about punishing you. It's about both of us learning to live authentically instead of in roles that no longer serve us. Marcus stood up and helped Sophia to her feet, careful with her elaborate dress. We should get back to the reception. People will be wondering where we are. Yes, I said. You should get back to your celebration. It's your wedding day, after all. At the door, Sophia turned back one more time. Mom, I do love you. I know I haven't shown it well today, but I do love you. I know you do, sweetheart. And I love you too. But love isn't enough if it's built on shame and lies. We both deserve better than that. After they left, I sat alone in my quiet house, surrounded by the detritus of a life spent in service to someone else's dreams. Tomorrow I would start the process of dismantling this life and building a new one. Tomorrow I would begin the strange, terrifying, liberating process of living for myself, but tonight, for the first time in decades, I felt something I'd almost forgotten existed, hope for my own future. 6 months later I stood on the balcony of My new downtown condo, sipping morning coffee from a mug I'd bought simply because I liked its cheerful yellow color, not because it was on sale, not because it was practical, but because it made me smile. Below me, the city was waking up, and I was part of it in a way I'd never been before. No longer the tired woman driving in from the suburbs to serve other people's meals, but someone who belonged in this vibrant, busy world. The condo was everything. My old house hadn't been modern, efficient, mine alone. I'd furnished it carefully, choosing pieces that reflected my taste rather than what was cheapest or most practical. The dining table was smaller than my old one, but it was solid cherry wood that gleamed in the morning light. The sofa was cream-colored leather that I would have never dared buy when Sophia was younger, too worried about spills and stains. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah Mitchell. Closing went perfectly. Your buyer loves the house already. How does it feel to be officially mortgage-free? It felt surreal. For 18 years, that house payment had been the constant weight on my shoulders, the number I calculated and recalculated every month, wondering if I'd have enough left over for groceries and utilities. Now, at 43, I own my home outright and had money in savings for the first time since Sophia was born. The money from the house sale had done more than just buy me financial freedom, it had bought me choices. I'd left the diner 3 weeks ago, walking out on a busy Friday night shift without the familiar knot of anxiety about next month's bills. Instead, I was starting a new job on Monday at a small marketing firm downtown, using the business degree I'd earned through night classes years ago but never had the courage to leverage. My phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. Sophia's name appeared on the screen, and I felt the familiar flutter of complicated emotions that had defined our relationship for the past 6 months. Hi, sweetheart. Mom, hi? Her voice was careful, the way it had been since our confrontation at the wedding. Are you busy? I was hoping we could talk. We'd been talking, carefully, sporadically, like diplomats negotiating a fragile peace treaty. She'd called every few weeks, usually with some practical concern about my move or my job search, but underneath every conversation was the weight of everything we hadn't fully resolved. I'm free. What's on your mind? Marcus and I had dinner with his parents last night. They were asking about you, wondering if you'd like to join us for Sunday brunch sometime. This was new. For months after the wedding, Marcus's family had treated me like a volatile element to be carefully managed. Polite inquiries about my well-being filtered through Sophia, but no direct invitations, no attempts to include me in their family gatherings. That's very kind of them, I said, genuinely surprised. Mom, I told them the truth. About everything. I set down my coffee cup and walked inside to my living room, settling into the comfortable reading chair I'd bought myself for Christmas, a real leather recliner that had been wildly impractical and absolutely perfect. What do you mean, everything? About the fraud. About the lies. About how much you sacrificed for my wedding and how ashamed I was of needing help. Her voice was quiet, but steady. About how wrong I was to let them think I'd done everything myself. This was the conversation I'd been both hoping for and dreading since the wedding. The one where we finally addressed the elephant that had been living in our relationship for years. How did they react? Marcus's mother cried, Sophia said with a shaky laugh. She said she wished she'd known so she could have properly thanked you for raising such a strong daughter. His father was angry, not at me, but at himself for not seeing what was happening. He said they would have been honored to contribute to the wedding openly if I'd just been honest about our situation. I closed my eyes, imagining that conversation. The relief Sophia must have felt at finally dropping the pretense, mixed with the shame of admitting to months of deception. I'm proud of you for telling them, I said, and meant it. It wasn't easy. I kept waiting for them to look at me differently. To realize I wasn't the independent success story they thought they were getting as a daughter-in-law. But you know what happened instead? What? They started treating me like family instead of like a guest they had to impress. Marcus's mom offered to teach me her grandmother's recipe for Christmas cookies. His dad started asking my opinion about business decisions, treating me like someone whose judgment he respected instead of someone he had to be careful around. It was exactly what I'd tried to tell her that night in my living room, that hiding who you are prevents people from loving you for who you actually are. But some lessons can't be taught, they have to be lived. There's something else, Sophia continued. I've been in therapy. Not couples therapy, just me, working through some things with a counselor Marcus's work insurance covers. Oh, sweetheart. How's that going? Hard. Really hard. She's helping me understand how I developed such shame around money and class differences. How I internalized the idea that needing help made me weak, and how that shame poisoned my relationship with you. I felt tears pricking my eyes, but they weren't the bitter tears I'd cried in the months after the wedding. These were the tears of a mother watching her child grow, even when that growth was painful. I called Robert Kellerman, I said suddenly, surprising myself. The man from your past? Your old fiancé? I've been thinking about the choices I made when I was younger, the patterns I fell into. I realized I'd been carrying guilt about how I treated him, and I wanted to apologize properly. What did he say? That he'd forgiven me years ago, but he appreciated hearing it. We had coffee last week, actually. He brought pictures of his kids, they're wonderful. And his wife seems lovely. What I didn't tell Sophia was that seeing Robert again had been like looking through a window into an alternate life. Not a better life necessarily, but a different one. A life where I'd chosen stability over passion, where I'd been part of a true partnership instead of carrying all the responsibility alone. That it had made me realize that it wasn't too late to make different choices now. Mom, there's something I need to ask you, and I need you to be completely honest. Okay. When you sold the house and moved downtown, when you changed jobs and started this new life, was that about punishing me? Was it about making me feel guilty for how I treated you? I considered the question carefully. In the immediate aftermath of the wedding, there had been elements of anger and hurt in my decisions. But 6 months later, living in my bright condo with a job I enjoyed and money in the bank, I could see the deeper truth. No, sweetheart. It was about saving myself. I was drowning in a life that was all about serving other people's needs and never acknowledging my own. The wedding was just the moment I realized I couldn't live that way anymore. I miss having you as my safety net, she admitted quietly. I know. And I miss being needed the way I used to be needed. But we both had to learn that need and love aren't the same thing. There was a long pause, and then Sophia said, I want to pay you back. For the wedding, for college, for all of it. Marcus and I have been saving up, and his parents offered to help with a loan if needed. We want to make it right. It was a generous offer, and I could hear in her voice that she genuinely wanted to repair the financial damage our relationship had caused me. But I also knew that accepting it would pull us both back into the old patterns we'd been trying to escape. Thank you for offering, but no. Those were gifts, given freely out of love. They don't need to be repaid. But Mom, Sophia, if you want to make amends, don't do it with money. Do it by building a marriage based on honesty. Do it by treating your own children, if you have them someday, as whole people deserving of respect, not just extensions of your own needs. Do it by remembering that love isn't about perfection or appearances. Another pause, and then, will you come to brunch on Sunday? I'd really like you to get to know Marcus's family properly. The real way, not the carefully managed way we did before. I smiled, looking around my peaceful living room. On the side table was a photo of Sophia and me from her high school graduation, not the formal portrait we'd paid for, but a candid shot Linda had taken of us laughing together in the parking lot afterward. In it, we looked like what we were, a mother and daughter who genuinely enjoyed each other's company. I'd love to come to brunch. Really? You're not still angry? I'm not angry, sweetheart. I'm different. We're both different. And maybe that's exactly what we needed. After we hung up, I sat in my chair for a long time, thinking about the strange journey that had brought me to this moment. 6 months ago, I'd been a woman who defined herself entirely by her sacrifices, who measured her worth by how much she could give up for other people. I'd been proud of that identity, had worn my martyrdom like a badge of honor, but martyrdom, I'd learned, was just another form of hiding. Instead of being honest about my own needs and limitations, I'd used my sacrifices to avoid having to ask for what I wanted. It had been easier to give everything away than to risk being seen as selfish or demanding. The wedding had forced me to confront the cost of that approach, not just the financial cost, but the emotional cost of raising a daughter who couldn't love me without shame because I'd never modeled what it looked like to love myself. My phone buzzed with a text from David Chen, my old boyfriend who'd become a successful accountant. We'd reconnected through mutual friends a month ago, and had Been slowly building a friendship based on who we were now rather than who we'd been 20 years ago. Still on for dinner tonight? I found a great new restaurant downtown. I typed back, looking forward to it. 6 months ago, the idea of dating would have seemed impossible. I'd been too tired, too broke, too focused on Sophia's needs to imagine having space in my life for romance. But now, with my own life stabilized and my relationship with my daughter on honest footing, I was rediscovering parts of myself I'd forgotten existed. David wasn't Robert, he was someone entirely new, someone I was getting to know as the woman I'd become rather than the girl I'd been. He was kind and successful and genuinely interested in my thoughts and opinions. More importantly, he seemed to enjoy my company without needing me to fix anything or sacrifice anything. It was a novel experience, being appreciated simply for existing. As the afternoon sun slanted through my windows, I thought about the conversation I'd have with Sophia's children someday, if she had them. I'd tell them about their grandmother who'd worked in a diner and lived paycheck to paycheck, who'd made mistakes and learned from them, who'd loved their mother fiercely but had to learn to love herself too. I'd tell them that families are complicated, that love sometimes looks like letting go, and that the most important gift you can give someone is the space to be honest about who they really are. And most of all, I'd tell them that it's never too late to choose yourself, to build a life based on your own values and dreams rather than other people's expectations. My phone rang again. David, probably calling to confirm our dinner plans. I answered with a smile in my voice, ready to discuss restaurant options and movie preferences and all the ordinary, wonderful complications of a life lived for its own sake. Outside my window, the city hummed with energy and possibility. Somewhere across town, Sophia was probably planning Sunday brunch and thinking about how to navigate the new dynamic between us. Tomorrow I'd start a job that challenged me intellectually and paid me well. Next month I was flying to Europe for the first time in my life, a solo trip I'd booked simply because I'd always wanted to see Paris. The future stretched ahead of me, uncertain but mine to shape. And for the first time in 23 years, that felt like more than enough. Epilogue. 2 years later, the cafe in downtown was busy with the lunch crowd, but Sophia spotted me easily at our usual table by the window. She looked radiant in the way that only expectant mothers do, her hand resting protectively on the gentle swell of her belly. "Sorry I'm late," she said, settling into the chair across from me. "Doctor's appointment ran long, but everything looks perfect. The baby's healthy and active. How are you feeling?" "Terrified," she laughed. "But excited. Marcus is already reading parenting books and researching the best schools. I keep telling him we have 7 months to figure it out, but you know how he is with planning." I did know. Marcus had proven to be a thoughtful, devoted husband who approached every challenge with careful research and genuine commitment. He'd also become someone I genuinely enjoyed spending time with, now that we could interact without pretense or deception. "Have you thought about names?" "We're keeping it a surprise, but if it's a girl." She smiled shyly. "We were hoping to use Helen as a middle name. If that's okay with you." The simple gesture brought tears to my eyes. Not because I needed my name attached to my grandchild, but because it represented something deeper, Sophia's willingness to publicly acknowledge our connection, to honor the relationship we'd rebuilt on honest ground. "I'd be honored." She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "I want to be the kind of mother you were to me, just, maybe with a little more balance. I want to love my children fiercely but also show them what it looks like to take care of yourself. You'll figure it out. Every generation does it a little differently. Will you help? Not financially," she added quickly, "but with advice, with babysitting when we need it, with being the kind of grandmother who spoils them just enough but not too much." Try to stop me. As we ordered lunch and chatted about nursery themes and baby equipment, I reflected on how far we'd both come. Sophia had grown into her marriage, becoming more confident and authentic with each passing month. She'd been promoted at work and had started volunteering at a financial literacy program for young women, helping them navigate the same challenges she'd once struggled with. I'd married David 6 months ago in a small ceremony that was everything my young dreams had been: intimate, genuine, focused on the commitment rather than the spectacle. Sophia had been my maid of honor, and in the photos from that day, we both looked like women who'd found peace with themselves and each other. "Mom," Sophia said suddenly, "I never properly thanked you for what you did that night after my wedding. For forcing me to face the truth about who I was becoming. You don't need to thank me for that. Yes, I do. You saved me from turning into someone I couldn't respect. You taught me that love has to be based on truth, even when the truth is uncomfortable. As we finished our lunch and prepared to part ways, I thought about the young woman I'd been when I first held Sophia as a baby. I'd been so determined to give her everything I'd never had, to protect her from every hardship I'd endured. I'd thought that was what good mothers did: sacrifice endlessly, shield their children from reality, make their path smooth and easy. What I'd learned, almost too late, was that the greatest gift I could give her was the example of a woman who knew her own worth. Not a martyr, not a victim of circumstance, but someone who made conscious choices about how to spend her love and energy. The sacrifice had been real, the money, the time, the opportunities I'd given up for her sake. But the transformation had been real too. We'd both had to learn to love each other as complete people rather than as extensions of our own needs and fears. As I walked back to my office through the busy streets of downtown, I smiled at the thought of becoming a grandmother. This time, I'd know better how to love without losing myself, how to give generously without giving everything away. It had taken me 45 years to learn that the most radical act a mother can perform is teaching her children that she matters too. But some lessons are worth learning late, especially when they change not just your own life, but the lives of generations to come. The sun was warm on my face as I walked, and somewhere across town, my daughter was planning a future built on the solid foundation of truth we'd finally learned to build together. It was, I thought, a pretty good ending to the story I'd been afraid would never have one. The end. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe and turn on the notification bell, so you don't miss any upload from us.